Kia ora, my name is Brad, and I've decided to just put a few videos together to help especially Christians, but really anyone, to think biblically about how we react and respond to this pandemic that is sweeping the world. Right now we're in the second day of a lockdown in New Zealand, which is where I'm from. But I have friends all around the world that are also in lockdown, from the Kingdom of Nepal to Texas in the US. This is something that's affecting, at this point I've read, 1/5 of the entire population of the world. This pandemic is sweeping our globe. And the key question I want to reflect on in a series of these short videos is, how do we respond to that? How do we react to that? Particularly from my point of view, as a Christian and as a pastor, how do we think biblically in light of what we're facing these days? And so I want to invite you to take these videos. I'm putting them up on Instagram and Facebook. Just share them with whoever you would like to, whoever you think this would be helpful for. This first video, though, I want to speak to the most important response of all that we can make to COVID-19, and it's this: trust God. The most important reaction I think that the Bible would call from us is to continue to trust God. And to help us think a little bit about that, and for these next few minutes, I just want to reflect on one of my favorite Psalms. It's called Psalm 121. It's part of a group of about 15 Psalms that are often called the Pilgrim Psalms. They were songs that were sung by the people of Israel as they would go on pilgrimages to the city of Jerusalem. But this Psalm in particular, I think, has got something very powerful to say to us in these days. It opens up with a question in verse 1. It's only 8 verses long, but this is the way it begins in verse 1. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? Now, this might be a familiar verse to some of you. It may ring a bell for you, but I think for many of us, we've misunderstood the opening verse of the Psalm. And I think for many, it's because of the way that the old King James Version of the Bible translated this. The King James had something like, I lift up my eyes to the mountains or the hills from where my help comes. More of a statement than a question. And it made it sound as though the psalmist, who's anonymous, is looking up at the hills or the mountains ahead of them and saying, where does my help come from? It comes from there. That's not what the psalmist is actually saying at all. In fact, quite the opposite. The psalmist is on a pilgrimage. And he or she is looking at these mountains ahead that they have to traverse or cross. It's the challenge ahead of them. The mountains don't represent where the help is coming from. The mountains represent the challenge ahead. And that's a really key thing for us right now, isn't it? I lift up my eyes to the television and see the latest news bulletin, or the newspaper and read the latest death count. Or I lift up my eyes to the latest count of this pandemic, however many people have got COVID-19 across the world, and I think, good night, where does my help come from? That's the sense of this opening verse. And the psalmist then answers his own question in verse 2. My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. People in my church probably get sick of hearing this, but when you see Lord in capital letters, in English Bibles at least, it's translating the name of God, Yahweh, in the Old Testament. And when the Old Testament writers wanted to emphasize the greatness and grandeur and power of God, it would use his title Elohim, which we translate God. But when it wanted to emphasize relationship with God and covenant and God's faithfulness and loyal love to his people, it would use God's name, Yahweh. And so the writer here looks at the challenge ahead and says, where does my help come from? And then answers his own question. My help comes from Yahweh, the maker, the creator of heaven and earth. And so the psalm really begins with this Q&A. When I need help, when I look at the challenges ahead, where does my help come from? And then he answers the question, my help comes from Yahweh, my God. And then the rest of this little psalm, just the next 6 verses, really go on and give 3 key reasons why we can look to Yahweh and trust in him as our help. So the first reason is in verses 3 and 4. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. It's a reassurance that Yahweh God is fully present with us in every single moment. Because God is limitless. He's not limited by time and space like we are. And that means that we can be assured that God is fully present with you, and at the same time, He's fully present with me. It's not as though there's a piece of God each place around the globe. He is fully with each of His children. And He doesn't slumber, He doesn't nod off to sleep. Even when you're in the deepest of sleeps, Yahweh is fully with you. No matter what you're facing, no matter where you are, He is your help because He's there, fully present. Second reason then is in verses 5 and 6. Yahweh watches over you. Yahweh is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. Now, this is not a promise that you'll never get sunburn if you go out in the sun and don't put lotion on. It's a picturesque way of saying that God is for you. Yahweh cares for you. He is deeply loving. Makes me think of the words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus pointed to the wildflowers and the little sparrows and said, "How much does your Father care for them?" And Jesus argues from the lesser to the greater. If your Father cares for a wildflower in a hidden valley, or the smallest sparrow, don't you think He cares for you, His son or His daughter? Our God is deeply loving. And then thirdly, at the end of the psalm, it says Yahweh will keep you from all harm. He will watch over all of your life is the idea. Yahweh will watch over your coming and going both now and forevermore. Just as He is not limited by space, He's fully present with each of us no matter where we are, neither is He limited by time. He's fully present with you today, but He's already inhabiting your tomorrow and your next week and your next month. He is with you fully right through your life already, which means He will always be there and He will never leave you. And so what you get then in this beautiful psalm is this incredible promise. As we face the challenges ahead, specifically right now as we think about this pandemic, about what COVID-19 brings to our world, and we think, where does our help come from? The answer in the psalm is that our help comes from Yahweh, our God. And He is fully present, and He is deeply loving, and He will always be there. And because of that, no matter whether we have the virus or not, no matter whether our job and our financial security is under threat, no matter whether we've lost people we love or are scared for our future, He is with us and for us, and we can trust Him. And that's the call of Psalm 121. That's the first response that the Bible would have us make. Let's trust God in this time. I love the way that Eugene Peterson, the late pastor, professor, author of The Message, reflected on this. He wrote these words: Christians travel the same ground that everyone else walks on. We breathe the same air, we drink the same water, we shop in the same stores. But we also, he says, we fear the same dangers. We're subject to the same pressures, we get the same distresses. We're worried about the same virus. But Eugene Peterson went on to say the difference for those who follow and love God, the difference is that each step we walk, each breath we breathe, we know we're preserved by God. We know we're accompanied by God. We know we are ruled by God. He will watch over our life. In fact, that's the emphasis of Psalm 121. 6 times the psalmist will say in those verses, He watches over us. He's watching over you right now. He is your help. So, in response to COVID-19, let's trust our God. So, stay home, keep safe, save lives, but most of all, trust God. God bless.